we're waiting, can I get quick intros from people, just like name and what you do, or where you're from, or something? Let's start over here.
My name's Ryan. I'm an art programmer. My name's Mike. I'm a software engineer dabbling in hardware on the side.
I'm Bill. I'm
My name's Ian Busonette. I work for a pharmacy software company, and I kind of dabble in all aspects of software development.
Hi, I'm Jess, and I do software development, DevOps, and whatever in between.
I'm Anthony. I do systems programming, and I own a bunch of ARM boards.
A bunch of what?
A bunch of ARM boards.
Oh, cool. Nice.
My name's Henry. I'm a student at Western.
I'm Alan. I have a small robotics consultancy.
I'm Randy. I'm a Canadian student.
John Holdrick. I'm from BC. I'm a work in IT security.
Paul, I've got my own business, 25 years doing web page design, software development, and some hardware development.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to start. Is this thing rolling? Okay. I won't hit it. So I have to stand nearby, I guess. I'm Josh Lifton. I'm the co-founder and CEO of CrowdSupply. And I'm going to give kind of a broad overview of what we do with open hardware and where I think open hardware is going and kind of the state of the union in a way. But feel free to ask any questions whenever you want. I'll try to leave time at the end for some questions as well. So my background is in I was at the MIT Media Lab. That's where I got my doctorate. And when I was there, I did a lot of work in sensor networks and distributed systems and mesh networks and things like that. And it was purely, academic. There was really no. This is an example of a network that I made, and it was confined to this board. It wasn't. There was no real use case, and I was just interested in the theory side of it, really. And but I soon realized that the harder thing was actually figuring out what you use it for. And so as my work kind of progressed, this is what I ended up working on more, something that actually had an application. It was this power brick, or not a power brick, but a power surge protector and power strip that had all these sensors on it. And the idea was you spread these around the building, and people actually use them. You can measure how they're using them and what's going on around them with motion sensors, light sensors. You can measure the current very precisely. There was some work that I didn't do, but that was interesting. That said that if you measure the current of a PC carefully enough, you can actually tell which programs are running just from the current profile. So it's like, it's kicking in this pattern. It must be Photoshop or Word or whatever. So that's kind of where I ended up in my research. Of course, today this is kind of called the Internet of Things, right? We called it a lot of different things back then, but the Internet of Things is something that we talk a lot about, but it doesn't actually exist yet, right? There are a bunch of things, and there's an internet, but they're not really together, right? And the internet, of course, is built on open source, as we all know and appreciate, I think. And it was easy in a way, because electrons and photons are cheap, right? So it's cheap to move lightweight things, but it's expensive to move things with mass atoms and things that are manufactured. And that's where crowdfunding comes in, right? You need to fund that somehow. And so this foundation of open source and crowdfunding is kind of the theme of this talk, and in many ways the theme of what we do at CrowdSupply. It's this foundation, this special combination of open source and crowdfunding is the enabling piece for a lot of different things. So the Internet of Things is one of them. There's no incentive for a company or really any organization to make lots and lots of things that all talk to each other and make your world a better place. They can make one thing, but then they're competing against other people. There has to be some, just like the internet emerged. I don't think I have to go into that in too much detail, but the Internet of Things will emerge in this collaborative way, in a decentralized way. The next thing that this foundation enables, this open source plus crowdfunding foundation, is in a way similar to how food is today. Or today you can go and if you see these peaches in a store, you wouldn't know, or if you saw it here, I mean, you wouldn't know where they were made, or were they sprayed with pesticides, or are they heirloom, or are they free trade, or are they fair trade. There's all these nomenclature, biodynamic, natural, organic, etc. When what's actually in the store, you can see that, and it's labeled, and as a consumer, you're cued to understand, and it's easy for you to make a decision, right, a purchasing decision. Contrast that with a laptop, or what we call hardware today, right? And this, we're about 30 years behind of where the food industry is, where the organic food industry is. You don't really know. It's just kind of this machine that has a keyboard, a screen. It might be made by Intel or Samsung or something, but you don't really know how it was made, what's inside of it, what's running inside it. This is vastly more complicated, of course, than a peach in many ways. And so the provenance of it and the quality of it and what is it doing for you, you don't really know until you dig very deep into it, and the average consumer isn't doing that. So the second category of products that or hardware that is enabled by this open source and crowdfunding combination are those that fight for the user, right? And these are products that everyone that currently exists that's making them nearly has the opposite incentive. Right? They're not fighting for the user; they're fighting for themselves and for their profit and their bottom line. A really good example of this is the Lenovo. Lenovo makes the ThinkPads line of laptops, and they last summer got caught with a superfish. I want to call it a virus, but it's not really because they intentionally put it there, right? So this was an instance of a consumer could buy directly from the manufacturer. There's no middle people at all. Right? There's no government agencies intercepting or the mafia putting Trojans and viruses on your computer. You're buying directly from the manufacturer, and yet it still has software that is hurting you, right? It's collecting information about you. It's being sent off to an ad network. And so most people, they can't even buy a device that fights for them. So this takes out those middle people and is a much more direct approach. And you're much more likely to get a product that actually fights for your rights with this combination of open source and crowdfunding. And again, there's no incentive. The crowdfunding is important because there's no financial incentive to do it otherwise. You have to do it directly to the people who most care. And then finally, the last example is can be seen in the comparison between something like an Arduino, which is a tool, right? It's not really, you wouldn't consider it like a consumer product per se, but you can make things out of Arduinos. It's fairly simple, right? It's an 8-bit controller. Has a great ecosystem. That's why everyone uses it. But its genesis wasn't in at NASA. It wasn't at Microsoft Research or some big lab. It was just in a garage, basically, the equivalent of a garage. And it's a great tool that built up, and it's a mature ecosystem. Compare that with something like an FPGA. The next generation of hardware, in a way, is FPGAs, pre-programmable gate arrays. And these are insanely complex compared to an Arduino. And the resources it would take to develop that same sort of ecosystem, that same sort of plug-and-play ecosystem where software developers, without knowing much about the hardware underlying it, can easily use it and program it and make things, is so complicated and expensive that you could really only get it from NASA or a big organization or a research lab. And they had no incentive to share that or to make that or to cultivate that ecosystem. This is the snickerdoodle, which funded last fall on CrowdSupply. And it is exactly that. And it was enabled by that open source and crowdfunding. So those complex tools that will allow for machine vision, real-time machine vision, robotics control, 7-axis CNC machines, self-driving cars, all of that, which we're excited about and reading about in the media, those tools will be enabled by this combination. So really, it's this notion of open source and crowdfunding is as enabling things that couldn't otherwise exist, things that we are otherwise impossible. Now, of course, you have to make these things, and that ecosystem is really blowing up too, right? This is a page out of Bunnie Huang's Essential Guide to Electronics and Shenzhen book, and it's just an example of somebody anywhere in the world can develop some hardware and have it made and go to Shenzhen themselves, or even not go, and still have it made in a way that was previously inaccessible to anyone but large manufacturers. So that ecosystem is helping us along. This is a page out of the book. If you need to choose diodes and don't speak any Chinese, you can just point and have the exact diodes and quantities and timelines that you wanted. So from out of this whole morass of open source and crowdfunding, that's kind of where CrowdSupply came from. We built CrowdSupply to specifically cater toward open hardware. We do all sorts of hardware, not just open hardware right now. But we only do manufactured things. Let me give you a brief rundown of how we work, and then we'll get into some of the things that we've actually shipped. So we're international. We take orders from all over the world. We take projects from all over the world, as long as it's legal and we can get you money or take money. Then we'll do it. We do a wide range of projects. It's not just laptops. That laptop, by the way, is the one I'm presenting off of. It's the Purism Librem 13 laptop. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But we've done hot sauces. We've done the circuit stickers, which are peelable stickers that have electronics embedded on them. And at first glance, they're very different things, but they actually have quite a bit in common. First, obviously, they're physical products. So we don't do arts patronage. We don't do charity. Second is that they all have, before they launch, they have to have a good plan to actually get the money they're asking for, right? So we've had plenty of people come to us and say, I need $300,000 for a pencil sharpener. And there is maybe a pencil sharpener that deserves that much. But if you don't have the plan to actually make that money, then what's the point in doing it at all? So you have to have at least some semblance of a plan. We can help you make that plan. That's one of the things we do. And then finally, you have to have a good plan to spend that money. This is the most important part. Is once you get it, we don't want you to squander it. We want you to actually deliver on your promises. And so this is more about looking at bills of materials and cost of goods sold and things like that. The plan to raise funds is more of a marketing question and pairing that with
Go ahead and finish.
It's a marketing question that pairs, making sure there's not a mismatch between how much you're asking for and your reach and your marketing plan, how many people you can get in front of.
So I'm going to ask, do you ever serve as an intermediary with hardware vendors?
We've connected people with vendors before, and we have on our site. There's a providers directory that is a directory of vendors and consultants and suppliers and manufacturers that have actually worked on projects that have launched on CrowdSupply. So you can go and click through and see which projects they've worked on, and you can judge their work directly. So yes, we've done that before. We don't actually manufacture anything though. So let me make that clear. Okay, so that's kind of the kind of dry logistical commonalities of projects that launch on CrowdSupply. But what actually makes a great project? Why are these great projects? And there's a whole blog post on this that I won't recap here. Well, I will recap just briefly here. But you can dig into more detail on our blog. First is they all have some community aspect, right? They're serving a specific community. It's not just something that everyone needs. It's like this specific set of people could really use this, right? Whether it's your friends and family or people who develop robots or any identifiable community. Second is that they typically all empower that community to do something that they couldn't do before, whether it's introducing them to electronics via crafting and kind of opening the door to people who traditionally wouldn't have learned about electronics otherwise, or opening up a new tool set to people who are already quite talented but just need better tools. And then finally, they all have a pretty strong respect for user rights, and we'll talk a bit more about that at the end of this talk. So the upshot of this is, there's 3 metrics that we follow at the Crowd Supply for our projects. One is just did you get funded or not, and yes, we do pretty well at that. This is about twice the likelihood of getting funded with us than anywhere else, or more. The amount of money you get on average is right now is $53,000, and that's from a couple $100 to several $100,000. And this is just the average, and this is about 3 times greater than our competitors. And then finally, and most importantly, how many of those projects actually got to people, right? Were manufactured and delivered. And this is the thing this is the reason we founded Crowd Supply 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago now. It was to make sure that if somebody gets money from a customer, that customer actually gets the thing, right? It's a ridiculous notion that if you pay money, you shouldn't expect to get the thing. You should expect that. And we work really hard with our creators to make sure that they have a good plan for doing that. And there are hiccups along the way. I think people are late. They're less late than anywhere else, I think. But so far, everyone has delivered or is on track to deliver. Okay, so there's always a question of how many people have used Kickstarter before or Indiegogo, or at least know about them. Okay. So there's always the question that comes up, and I'll just answer it now, of how can we possibly get as much traffic as those places, right? Because clearly that's how these people raise money, is you get traffic. And this is kind of the dark secret of crowdfunding, right? There's no crowd of people there. You have to go and create that crowd, right? So while yes, there are many, many, many more people on Indiegogo and Kickstarter browsing around or looking at the pages anyway, there are many, many more projects also. And so per project, it's actually much smaller than what we get, right? And so you're bringing the crowd to us, actually, or to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, not the other way around. We can talk more about that later, but because it always comes up, figured I'd answer it now. Okay, so some projects that have launched on Crowd Supply that are of particular interest to LinuxFest Northwest. And by the way, I just got here, so maybe I missed this joke already, but I couldn't, at first, when I was coming into Bellingham Technical College, it's like, wow, these guys are super progressive. Like, everything's in Bitcoin. And I was just amazed. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then it dawned on me, right? Anyway, so the Novena, this was by Bunnie Pong and Sean Zob's Cross. This was half. I mean, it really depends on where you're coming from, but some people, they just love it as a piece of art, right? It's on their desk. They might not use it. Other people use it every day. Other people tore it out of the case or didn't even buy the case and actually made a product out of it. It's a pretty amazing machine, right? It's an ARM-based processor. It was built specifically to be as open source as Bunnie and Zobs thought they could make it. So as such, there's no binary blobs in there beyond what's in the hard drive firmware itself and a couple other pieces. But those don't interact directly, I don't think, with the CPU. It's made to be a kind of a hardware hacker's paradise, right? Like, it opens backwards, and you can see all the guts in the back. There's an FPGA on it, actually on the motherboard next to the processor. Runs Debian, but you can put a couple other things on it. And open source all the way down to the battery charging circuit. So, and arguably, I think it's the most open source thing out there right now in terms of a laptop, a functional laptop. And we could argue a lot about what that means and whatnot. I was the campaign manager for this campaign. We did the marketing, we did the kind of strategy around it, and we did fulfillment and a bunch of customer support. We're selling the parts now, so you can go build one yourself from parts. and we're continuing to support that community. This is a graph from this is money is the y-axis and time is the x-axis in days, and you can see in a 46-day campaign, more than half of the funds came in the last 48 hours, and this was a combination, I think, of the high price point. So this went from between $500 and $5,000, depending on which variation you were getting. So people were kind of sitting on the fence, but it was also because of the awesome stretch goals that were baked in. Does anybody have one of these? And I know there was a talk just before mine. I didn't get to see it, unfortunately, but
I went to that.
was it good?
Yeah, great.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to go watch it later. I was on a bus at the time. So lots of behind the scenes. Yeah, I know all the gory details of this campaign, but this is kind of the one that stands out to me. This, on the other hand, is the Librem 15-inch laptop by Purism, launched about 6 months or so later, and it's a very different machine. It is also strongly in the open source camp, but in a very different way. The idea here is to, given the bar of a performance, modern laptop, right? Given that as the ante to play, which the Novena admittedly is not, right? It's not a modern laptop. You can't play all these games on it, and it doesn't do a lot of things that most laptops do. This one does. And given that as the bar, the next priority was choose every component to be as free and open source as possible, right? So you don't have to run any binary mystery software on it as much as you can. Now, I was also the campaign manager for this, and this was an interesting campaign. The most interesting piece that I'll share here is that when it launched, it launched with these specs on the right, or on the left, your left. It had basically two different types, or two different amounts of memory. You have 4 gig or 8 gig, and I think 4 different storage configurations. And everyone started complaining and said, "Oh, I really like, 16 gigs of RAM or 32 gigs of RAM, and I want a extra drive slot instead of maybe I want a battery, or maybe I want an extra drive, or maybe I want an optical drive, or all these things. And I want Dvorak or Bibo, which is Dvorak in French, and all these different keyboards. And so it went from a SKU matrix of 8 different configurations to roughly 30,000, right? And in the span of a few weeks, Todd, the guy who ran the campaign and founded Purism, he just worked his butt off to accommodate all these requests, or as many as he could, and it just paid off in spades. This raised over $500,000, or maybe even over 600 with pre-orders. They're shipping. They did the second version, which is this. This is the 13-inch version, which I'm using. Similar configuration. A couple months later, and he'd already he learned a lot from this 15-inch campaign and baked all that into the 13. And one of the interesting things here is, can't really see it, and I don't want to screw up my connection here, but there are these hardware kill switches kind of tacked on here, and it kills the wireless capability as one of them, and then the camera and microphone is the other. So when I really want to know that I'm not being watched by somebody, I flip that switch. Or if I don't want to communicate at all, I flip that switch. This is, like I said, a very different take on open source, right, and what that means. This is from their website, and it's a graphical representation of all the software on the Librem machines. So up here, the top part of this upside-down pyramid is kind of user space software. Right? The next layer is the GNU OS. They have various flavors. You can get Debian or Qubes OS or whatnot. And green means that all those components are free. Right? They're completely freed up. I believe most of that's GPL. I'm not sure the exact license. And then there's the kernel underneath that, and that's a completely freed kernel. There's the bootloader beneath that. That is also completely freed. And then there are these two lines at the very, very bottom, right? And this is where the sticking point is. There's the hardware BIOS, and then there's the component and embedded firmware, right? So the component and embedded firmware, that's what I was mentioning before, like the firmware that's in the hard drive, actually. It doesn't necessarily interact with the CPU, but it's there, and it's doing something, and you don't know what it is. That is not freed yet, right? Just across the board, across all the components, not freed. The level above that is the hardware BIOS. And because this is an Intel chipset, it has the ME and the FSP on it, which are huge mystery blobs of software. And this is a real problem for a lot of people, right? But if you're using Intel, you're using those things, right? There is no modern processor that from Intel that does not have those things. And Purism, obviously this is their slide. They admit this, and their stated purpose is actually to free those things. Now it's very much a David versus Goliath battle here, and Intel has shown time and again that they do not want to free this. But Todd's premise is that if he shows demand for this sort of machine by selling them, then manufacturers will follow suit. So he has some interesting plans on how to do this, and I've talked to him extensively about it. He gets questions about it all the time, but we'll see what happens. Time will tell. So with that as the context, those are things that already exist, that we're selling, that we're funded on CrowdSupply, that we sell. We've raised a couple $1 million for those laptops. This is something that's coming up. This is called the EUMA 68 by Luke Layton. Anybody know? Anybody heard of this? Okay. This is a guy, super interesting guy. He's really tied into all these, what it means to be open source and the fine details of which firmware is open, which one is not. And so his goal is to make a truly completely free open source, down to every piece of software, every line of code that you could write that could go onto this thing would be free. And he's done it in an interesting way where it's a completely modular system. This is the motherboard. It's in the form factor of a PCMCIA card, right? And so he chose that because the hardware was available. That's a 68-pin slot on the right-hand side. So we're using the metal, but for totally different reasons. So don't plug this into a 90s laptop. It'll catch on fire or something. And he has a case for it too, right? The case. And so you have this little card, and you could carry it in your wallet or pocket or whatever. Take it with you. It is your CPU. It is your data. And then you could slot it into a laptop chassis, which he's come up with, or a tablet, or a camera, or a little desktop docking station, and have, you no longer need Dropbox or Google Drive or any of this. It's just always with you. So making good progress on this. I think this will be launching in the next few months, and it's come a long way. I've been talking to him for about 2 years now. By the way, all these things that I'm talking about, these projects that are coming up, you can go sign up and get on the mailing list, or you just sign up for our newsletter. It's the EOMA 68. I'm still trying to convince him to make a better name. But it stands for... Oh man, I don't even remember what it stands for now. The 68 is referencing the 68 pins of the PCMCIA.
It's something that, I want to write down something so that I can search on the term.
Yeah.
Is that something that...
EOMA. EOMA. Yeah, 68. But it should be listed on our pre-launch page. I'll show you that in a second. There's another idea. What does it mean to be open source? And this is maybe the most radical. It's not really open source. It's more like privacy and security of your data. This is the Orwell. Yeah.
No, that's a good name.
Yeah, right? And it's beautiful. I mean, it looks, this is not a rendering, or at least I don't think it is. It looks just like that anyway. It's this nice, hardened glass case, these clamps on it, and hidden in the four clamps are, for the 4 ports. There's a power port, you have 2 USB 3, and a mini micro HDMI, I think. So inside of this is another clamshell that's made of a very brittle plastic with extremely thin gold traces, like totally enveloping it. And that is the same technology that is used in any sort of banking hardware, right? To protect transactions, make sure there's no physical intrusion, and to make sure if there is, that you detect it immediately and shut down and burn your private key and just fry the thing. So this comes from a design firm called Design Shift down in the Bay Area. They've made all sorts of consumer electronics devices. The reason they made this is they had made something, I believe, called the Clover, which is a point-of-sale system that required the same PCI compliance. PCI is the acronym for the compliance that you need to have for bank transactions, credit card transactions. So they learned all about this, and they're like, well, this is great, but why put so much effort into making this so airtight and secure when it's only protecting banking transactions? Like, why don't we do that for everything we do on a computer, right? And so that's where this came from. There's a full-blown computer inside. The interesting part about that computer is it doesn't really know what's going on, right? You could put Windows on it, you could put Ubuntu on it, you could put Debian on it, and nothing in the operating system knows that it's in this secure computer. Instead, there's on the motherboard, there's a chip that's the same chip that is used in all these PCI-compliant devices that monitors the active mesh around it, holds the private key to the encrypted hard drive, and controls power, right? And it also talks to that key fob through NFC and BLE. And so if your key fob is close and and both those, the NFC and the BLE, check out, then it will allow you to power up. You put your passphrase in. That passphrase then unlocks the private key on that chip, sends it over, I think, via SPI or maybe I2C to the motherboard, and then motherboard decrypts and boots up. Right? If you remove the key fob, it will just still hum away, but as soon as it detects that it's being moved at all, it'll shut down. If it's actually breached, and there's a battery inside that will last like 6 months or so, so even if you power down, if it's breached at all, it'll burn everything down. So this is arguably the safest place to keep your data. And the root of trust here is interesting. It's pretty old school, right? You think about the global economy, whatever $30 trillion of transactions that happen on credit cards every year. What you're doing is you're saying, if I trust my credit card, then certainly I'm going to trust this thing. Because, yes, I actually don't know what's on this Maxim chip, this TPM, right? It's proprietary. You have to sign an NDA to find out how it works, right? Everything else is open, right? So the operating system, all that. And so you have to trust that this TPM doesn't have a backdoor or it isn't easily broken into. And that trust is kind of coming from that $30 trillion of transactions, right? So I don't think, or the argument goes that no bank or financial institution would allow a backdoor, and there's no government powerful enough to force them to do that. And so it's safe. Now that's that's a different sort of trust, right? And it would be awesome, actually. A stretch goal for this campaign, I think, will be to make an open source TPM, which would be pretty amazing. And it's only about 400 lines of code that I think you need. But they're very hard lines of code to write, apparently. So anyway, this will launch soon. They had a launch attempt earlier that failed before we knew about them, and I think we're getting them in good shape to launch on Crowd Supply in the next few months. Finally, in terms of upcoming things, this is the Line SDR. SDR stands for Software Defined Radio. There are many software-defined radios out there. The idea is that you can, in software, say, okay, I want this to be a LTE base station, right? So I can connect my phone to it. And literally just connect it as a base station for my phone, not afraid of Wi-Fi, but actually it thinks it's a cellular network, which it would. Or I can make it Bluetooth or Zigbee or WiMAX or anything you can think of and can program within a certain frequency range, it can do, right? This one's pretty interesting because it's better in a lot of the axes that you care about when you're doing SDR, such as like how many inputs can it do simultaneously and how many outputs can it do simultaneously. What's its frequency range? It can go from 100 kilohertz to 3.8 gigahertz, and it's a USB 3 connection. It's super interesting because of who's behind it. Line Microsystems has been around for I think over a decade. They make a ton of these chips. This is kind of their flagship product or upcoming product. They have a ton of experience, and they're partnering with Ubuntu. Ubuntu Snappy Core will run on this, and so now you don't really need to be an RF engineer to use it, right? You can say, well, I want this to be Wi-Fi and LTE. I'm going to download that from the App Store via Snappy Ubuntu Core or Snappy, whatever the three words are. Snappy Core, Ubuntu Snappy Core, yes. And be done, right? And then I just write an application on top of that. So we'll see. I think this has a ton of potential. It'll be launching in a few weeks, and it's also very cheap for what it is. Okay. Those are all coming up. This is something that we launched a long time ago. This is the Portland Press. It is some wood, some glass, some wool, and a few pieces of metal. And I think there's a gasket in there too, like a rubber gasket. There's no electronics at all. It's not really what most people would call hardware, but it is a manufactured good. And it was made almost as a design experiment, right? Almost as an art piece, to see if they could make, the two designers, Rob and Brian, they wanted to see how, what could they make that was within a 50-mile radius of Portland. They live in Portland, Oregon. We're based there. And so the wool is sheared from sheep that they went and saw and milled in a place that they went and saw the milling, and the wood is from trees that were cut down within a short distance of Portland, and again turned. And the glass obviously was not made in Portland. That's just a mason jar. And some of the metal was manufactured in China because we don't manufacture things like that anymore here. But it was stamped here, and it was assembled here. So this sells, and you can go to IKEA and probably get this for, not this exact thing, but you can get a French press for about $10, right? This one costs $125, or it did a while ago. I think it's down to $79 now. And they really just laid it bare their supply chain, right? And that's a form of openness that I would love to see more of, right? There's so much of the supply chain that you don't know about, even in so-called open hardware. So I consider this to be open hardware also, and I think that should be something that we take into account more often. This is a live campaign right now. By Star Simpson. It's the Circuit Classics. These are real-life versions of Forrest M. Mims' designs out of his books, such as the Getting Started in Electronics. She did a great job of recreating his hand-drawn circuits and descriptions, and this is for learning about electronics. If you know somebody who wants to get into electronics, if you use those, has anybody read those books? Yeah. And I had one as a kid. It was probably my first introduction to electronics. And I still remember it today. Not everything has to be a laptop or an SDR or kind of the cutting edge, right? There's also very simple things like the Circuit Classics or like this Snap VCC, which just gives you 3.3 volts and 5 volts out of a 9-volt battery. This is the sort of ecosystem that's emerging from, and all of this is open source, from this combination of open source and crowdfunding. Ultimate Hacking Keyboard. It's not really for people who want to hack on hardware, although you could make modules and make extensions for this. It's for people who want to completely own and control their keyboard and do different layouts. It snaps together. It's a pretty fancy thing. But this is a sort of complex tool that I don't think there's incentive to make. Otherwise, it's just too expensive to do a first run. And then there's consumer electronic devices, right? This is a Screamo Air Purifier. It looks like something that you'd expect to buy in a big box store, perhaps. It's beautifully designed by one of the best consumer electronics designers in the world, I'd say. He designed the Nike Fuel Band and some Cisco routers, and I bet there's something in your house or wherever you live that was designed by this guy. You may not even know it. But the interesting thing here is, it collects data. It's an air purifier. It's a fan, desktop fan style. It purifies the air. It also senses the air. So it changes how it purifies it depending on how it senses, right? And it tells you, hey, your filter it's not just been 6 months because I have a clock, but it's been maybe 5.5 months, and your air is slightly worse than normal, and I've been running for this long, so I'm going to tell you, get this filter. Not only change your filter, but get this particular filter, because you have high VOCs versus PM 2.5, right? Or you have you have more humidity versus dryness or temperature or whatever. And then the filter goes back to, you put the old filter into the new filter's packaging, you ship it back, and then it gets shredded and analyzed. And so you can see things that this can't see even with all that, with the sensors on it, such as cat dander, dog dander, how many people are living in the house based on skin cell analysis. What is in your air, really?
Does it do
right.
DNA analysis?
It probably could. I mean, that's not offered. But so clearly there are some privacy concerns here, right? And you want to own that data and make sure that it is yours. You don't really know if this is listening to you, for example, right? And so even in the consumer sphere, or especially in the consumer sphere, I should say, the idea of user rights and protections and the openness that's required to enforce those is super important. And that's where this is. I don't think anybody has ever seen this slide except for you folks and the people that I work with. I decided to put it in. We're about to announce this more publicly, but and in much more detail. But so in the same way that there are licenses, right? I can choose a GPL3 license, or I can choose a BSD license that really are legal documents, right? We're trying to come from the other side, right? Let's make people who are making hardware take a pledge and to protect our user rights. And these can be, here's the 8 that I think cover every case that I can think of anyway. I'm curious to hear your opinions. So real quickly, there's curiosity. This is the right to hack on and explore and reverse engineer whatever you buy. There's the right to independence from the creator, from the person who made the thing, so you don't have to be any longer connected via, say, a mandatory subscription that forces, if there can be subscription, but the thing has to work and be functional without it too. It may not be as functional, but you shouldn't be tethered to the creator of the device. There's longevity. You can use it for as long as you want without interference from the person who made it. There's ownership, meaning you actually own the device once you buy it. You're not leasing it. You're not. You can sell it to somebody else. You can do whatever you want with it once you have it. The right to discourse, to talk about the device in any way you want, whether that means benchmarking or criticizing it or promoting it in public forums. There's the right to associate the device that you buy with whatever other devices you want. So even I might want to plug in a different type of monitor or a different type of USB drive, not your brand of USB drive. Then, of course, there's privacy, the right of privacy and the right of making sure that you know how your data is being used and that person collecting the data is only using it for its intended purpose that you've agreed to. And finally, the security, your right to know about security breaches in a responsible manner for the creator to tell you as soon as they know, or to tell you in a responsible manner as soon as they know. So responsible there means they might actually wait a little while before they tell everyone, right, of course, which which is common in software. It should be in hardware as well. So these are the proclamation of user rights collectively that I think if every product if every producer, I should say, agreed to these, the world would be a much better place. This is something we're trying to do at CrowdSupply. And I'd love to see it adopted wherever. Okay. So thanks very much. You can find out more at crowdsupply.com/guide, which is kind of our creator guide if you're interested in launching a project, or you can just tool around on the site too, and kind of explore different projects and what's coming up. But I'm happy to open the floor to any questions now. Thanks. Yeah.
Well, I guess this question comes up a lot. You're a small guy, develop something. It's too expensive, and the supply chain isn't in the U.S., so you need to make it in Shenzhen or wherever, China.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just cut a $30,000 check and send it over there. So,
yeah.
Are you like the intermediate? I mean, you need some form of trust between the manufacturer and you.
Yeah.
That's the problem I see.
Yeah.
It's a huge barrier.
That is a big problem. There's a lot wrapped up into that. So first is the assumption that you have to do that. And almost always when people come to us and say we have to do that, we tell them that they don't. And there are exceptions, but most of the time that's true. Most of the time it actually makes more sense. And people who are those intermediaries would actually tell you should do it, make a run of 100 first, right? Even if it costs 10 times more, or even if you use a completely different material. A lot of that cost savings is in tooling for large runs, and so I'm getting this thing injection molded, and so I have to amortize the cost of that tooling across 10,000 units. Well, why don't you just CNC it or 3D print it? And yes, it's going to cost a whole lot more, but as long as you can still sell it and get market validation, that's what you should do first, right? So that's one thing. Another is there are companies, like I mentioned, that's their entire job is to be that intermediary, right? They have a U.S.-based office and personnel. They have Chinese or overseas-based offices and personnel, and they exist to be that neck to strangle, right? And to know that there's a chain of trust there. Now, knowing who your partners are is super important. There's no automated way of reliably getting things done otherwise, I think. And then there are cases, okay, so you decide you do need to do this, or you're at the point where you do want to make that leap. You can go there now, right? You can, like I said, the Shenzhen guidebook. People hopped on planes. Actually, this guy. This is a creator. This is the Snap VCC I mentioned earlier. This is a fairly small project, but he actually got it made in, I think it was Shenzhen. Maybe it was Hong Kong. Shenzhen. He's based in India. And he just wanted the experience of, he wanted to see them coming off the line. So he actually flew there. He partnered with Seed Studio, which I think a lot of people know about, and worked with them on this project. And they were great to work with for him. So it is possible to cut that check. If you can do the legwork yourself these days. It's just hard.
It seems like there's the cultural, there's language barrier, and just being in China wouldn't necessarily. I mean, you're a walking target. I mean, you're a foreigner there, and you're just a walking target. So you have to kind of understand the supply chain.
Yeah. I mean, Shenzhen is interesting because they're really accustomed to non-Chinese people being there now, and there's a lot of accommodation for that.
Is that something that your company would help with your project up to that level? Or?
We would help connect you with somebody who would do that for you, right? And by connect, I mean we're not taking a cut of that. We just want to make sure you're working with a good team that can deliver. And so, and we'd also give you our advice, our experience launching hundreds of projects and products. We want to bring that to bear on yours so that you are more successful in delivering. One of the things that's little known is that Crowd Supply makes the majority of its revenue on sales after crowdfunding. So we actually buy product, resell it, and we're usually the first reseller for the product. And so it's very much in our interest to make sure that it gets made, not only to keep people happy, but so that we can make more profit later selling it. Yeah.
Actually, can you kind of explain a little bit more about how Crowd Supply supports itself?
Yeah, the question for the recording is, how does Crowd Supply support itself? We take a cut of every sale, and that cut depends on where it is in the pipeline. So if it's crowdfunding, it's a certain percentage, and that percentage depends on how much work we had to do for the campaign. So we took a larger cut on, say, the Novena than on the Snap VCC, because we did the media for the Novena, we did the outreach, we did the strategy. Snap VCC, he did everything himself almost. I think we helped with some media, but so we take a cut that's variable. You can kind of see what we do here on the launch page. There's choose a plan, right, and the different things that you get from each plan. And then there's pre-orders. We take a cut of those. That's the time between the end of the campaign and when you've actually delivered. So while you're manufacturing, and that's an indeterminate amount of time. It's a different risk profile for people, for consumers to put money down, so we offer refunds and things like that. And then there's in-stock sales, where we've actually just bought up front a bunch of product from you, and then are reselling it, just as anyone else would. And then finally, there's fulfillment, right? So we have a warehouse, we ship from that warehouse. We have, going back to the Snap VCC example, he's in India, he had the things made in Shenzhen, he had them shipped to our warehouse, and we shipped them out all over the world, right? It seems somewhat inefficient, but it's actually incredibly efficient compared to the alternative of figuring it out yourself and getting the most efficient thing, right? So we'll charge a per package shipping fee and pass the freight cost through as well. And that's it. So there's no upfront fees or anything like that.
How long have you been in operation and publicly traded?
Yeah, so
Long-term value.
right. Are you an investor?
I'm very curious.
Are you looking for this?
The right people? Yeah, always. So we're a VC-backed company. We started life with a seed round even before we opened our doors. And that we got another round of funding about a year ago. We've been around for 3.5 years, coming up on 3.5 years. The site has been public for just over 3 years. It's been 3 years, almost exactly a month ago. And yeah, we've been making. We've had revenue since day one. People buy stuff, and that's what we do. Sorry?
Who's your venture capital?
We are funded by. We have a bunch of angels. Our anchor VC from the very beginning has been a company called Inspiration VC. Two guys, Robert and Gotti, out of the Bay Area. Very lucky to have Robert on the board, and super supportive. I didn't know them at all before this, and I think I lucked into that. More recently, we brought on Joey Ito as an investor. He's the director of the MIT Media Lab. SOS Ventures, which runs Hacks, formerly Accelerator, which is Sean O'Sullivan. We have a VC out of Bend, Oregon, called Seven Peaks Ventures, and then the Portland Seed Fund led our last round. Yeah.
What about the IP rights? Do you take any ownership of the IP
No.
rights?
No. So we don't take anything except for a cut of sales. So there's no exclusivity except. So once you've delivered to our customers, there's no exclusivity. Until you deliver to our customers, there's exclusivity on where you can sell.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, let's say the worst thing happens and your business tanks.
Crowd supply or the product?
Crowd supply.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens to the fees after that?
Well, so
would it be released from? Would the
yeah.
Would we be released from the contract?
Well, there is no. We only take fees of items that we sell.
Okay.
So you can go sell wherever you want
I see.
after that,
After
and
the finish.
we don't take a cut of that. So it's really not an issue at all. There's no. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we're probably the most liberal contract you'll ever see.
It sounds.
Yeah.
At the surface level.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious about how you go about marketing and distributing the thing, because for me, I'm an open source person, and that's very important to me. And as such, whenever I need to buy something, be it a laptop or a cell phone, I do try to go out of my way to find an open hardware and an open product as a general rule. But I've found that almost every product that I've purchased that was incredibly open, if not probably, because oftentimes you can't, like the info thing we've spoken about.
Yep.
It either was very difficult to get the product, unless you're a US citizen, which I'm not, or once you got it, the company shut down, so you couldn't upgrade or get support or anything else.
Yep.
So I'm curious about that, and I'm also curious about the marketing, because if I, a person who's very passionate about open things, have to take that much of an effort to find them, how would consumer Joe, who doesn't give a bloody rat's fuck, sorry about that,
They can't hear you.
these issues, goes about purchasing those?
Yeah, so I think those are great questions, and at the heart of the current state of affairs, I think, right? One of the things that we try to do is get broad coverage for these products. And so part of our work is taking the story that is given to us and trying to broaden it to a wider audience. And we do that the old-fashioned way, right? We do that with talking to journalists and helping them tell a story to their audience. I meet. It's not uncommon that I just meet with a journalist, not because there's a specific story we want told, but just to catch up and to have a conversation much like this, like what is the current state of affairs. So that's a big part of it. I think in terms of once we have a product and we want to sell it, keeping it available after the campaign is a critical piece, and that's something that's missing elsewhere. So the fact that you can go buy the Libra from us, but it was 2 years ago that it funded, is interesting. Yes.
So, we got a Novena and a Librem for came for you guys.
Oh yeah, I think I saw you at the in our office.
Yeah. I came pick it up. You guys have been really accommodating.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. But I don't like the Librem for a few reasons. Core boot was more or less promised in big non-committal terms, but
Yeah.
it's not delivered.
Well, there's core group, but not Libra group.
Right.
Mine doesn't have a good product like that. So, yeah, and I was trying to initiate a return process, but you guys kind of stepped out of that and just pointed me towards Scott, and he has not responded at all, so I wanted to know how you guys feel.
Yep. So Purism has undergone a lot of change lately. Todd is still the central figure. We do serve as an intermediary as much as we can for the customer. You're our customer as well as Todd's customer and as well as Purism's customer. My guess is he hasn't responded because they've gone through, I think, 2 different support people since maybe even 3 since the campaign started. But in our experience, if we just keep prodding him, he eventually takes care of it. So I would ask that you grab me after this and give me your details, and I'll think about it. In the end, it's his responsibility, and he's been great about doing the right thing, I think. So I'm confident that it'll be resolved. But like I said, talk to me afterward.
Alternatively, if anybody wants to buy the
Yeah.
13,
This is mine right here. I like it. I hate the trackpad.
Yeah, and the driver is not even a real trackpad driver yet.
Well, so
It's a mouse driver.
they have a driver. It's just not upstream yet,
Yeah.
and so I'd have to like recompile my kernel, and as much fun as that is, I just don't have time to do that right now. So instead, I type like this.
But we have it here if anybody wants to buy it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Save you some work, right?
Yeah.
How much would you sell it for?
Well, what we bought it for, I guess.
What was that?
So 21.
It was 21.05.
I could look it up.
Yeah, you can get information right now. Yeah.
Yeah, we should talk afterward. Anyway, I think we're
I mean,
just.
I do like compiling my kernel a lot. So.
Yeah, I actually do. It's just I don't have time.
It's very relaxing, you
Yeah.
can do it in the background.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks everyone for attending.
Thank
Happy to
you.
talk to you afterwards.